What he found there knocked the remaining breath from his lungs. Between the rocks, in the shade of an old willow tree, there was an indigenous woman, young. She must have been around 18, perhaps 20 years old, with long black hair spread around her face, wearing a thin leather garment decorated with colorful beads that Elias recognized as belonging to the Navajo people. She was lying on a blanket that appeared to have been carefully arranged, but her contorted expression made clear what was happening. She was in labor, advanced labor, judging by the frequency with which her lips pressed together in silence and her fingers gripped the rock beside her. The September sun was falling over the lands of the Callahan Ranch when Elias Woodrow, a man in his early 40s with calloused hands and a quiet spirit, decided that morning to ride out and check the condition of the fence that ran along the Colorado River. It was one of those simple rancher's tasks he repeated every week, more out of habit than necessity. Riding the perimeter of the property, checking the fence posts, observing the water level, and sometimes simply breathing the dry, orange-tinged air of that vastness he called home. Elias had arrived in those lands 20 years earlier, coming from the east with little more than a worn pair of boots, a horse named Chester, and the stubbornness that God tends to give men who have nothing else. With time and hard work, he had built a decent ranch, not the largest in the region, but an honest one. He raised a few cattle, grew corn and squash, and had a small apple orchard that was the pride of the property. He had lived alone since his wife, Clara, had left for the east to care for her ailing mother and had not yet returned. But Elias was not a man to complain about silence. For him, the silence of the desert had its own language that he had learned to respect. Chester was a bay horse of gentle temperament, a faithful companion on these morning rounds. He trotted slowly along the riverbank, ears erect and his steps sure on the red earth, while the Colorado ran lower than usual for that time of year, revealing flat, smooth stones in the middle of the riverbed, and the willows on the banks swayed their thin leaves with a gentle laziness. It was just as Elias was about to turn back that Chester suddenly stopped. The horse snorted, sniffed the air, and refused to go on. Elias knew that behavior well. Chester was not a nervous animal. When he stopped like that, there was a concrete reason. Elias dismounted calmly, tied the reins to a low willow branch, and walked on foot in the direction the horse had pointed his muzzle, a thicket of dense bushes a little below the bank, where the rocks formed a kind of natural shelter. What he found there knocked the remaining breath from his lungs. Between the rocks, in the shade of an old willow tree, there was an indigenous woman, young. She must have been around 18, perhaps 20 years old, with long black hair spread around her face, wearing a thin leather garment decorated with colorful beads that Elias recognized as belonging to the Navajo people. She was lying on a blanket that appeared to have been carefully arranged, but her contorted expression made clear what was happening. She was in labor, advanced labor, judging by the frequency with which her lips pressed together in silence and her fingers gripped the rock beside her. Elias stood still for a moment, not out of hesitation, but out of respect. He knew he needed to act, but he also knew that a woman in that condition, finding a light-skinned stranger leaning over her, might be frightened in a way that would help neither her nor the child. He crouched slowly, bringing himself to her eye level, and raised both hands open, the universal gesture that there was no threat. "You are safe," he said in English, and then tried the little Navajo he had learned over the years living in those lands. Ni joni, ayo anoshni. Words that meant more or less that she was well, that he was no enemy. The woman looked at him with deep black eyes, and Elias saw there something he recognized immediately. Not fear, but determination. She was in pain, she was alone, and yet there was a serenity in the way she breathed that profoundly impressed him. She said something in Navajo that he did not fully understand, but the tone was clear. She accepted his presence. Elias rolled up his shirt sleeves. He had helped cows, mares, and sheep bring young into the world. He knew that a birth was a birth, and that the human body, like that of any creature, knew what to do. His role was simply to make sure nothing went wrong. He filled his hat with water from the river, cool and fresh, and used the handkerchief he carried in his pocket to dampen his face. She accepted with a subtle nod. He spoke to her the entire time, not words with meaning, but the soft and steady kind of voice he used with Chester when the horse was agitated. A voice that said, "I am here. You are not alone. You can trust me." The labor lasted a little over half an hour. Elias was patient and attentive, and when the child finally came into the world, small, red, with clenched fists and a cry that would put any coyote to shame, he received him with both hands, with the care of someone holding something worth more than anything in that territory. Elias prepared the guest room, the only one he had, normally kept closed, with speed and efficiency. He put on clean sheets, brought the basin with hot water, lit the cast iron stove to warm the room. He fetched wild honey from the cupboard, the cornbread he had made 2 days earlier, and made a chicken broth that was ready in less than an hour. The woman, whom Elias had begun mentally calling the mother for lack of a name he could pronounce, visibly recovered over the course of the afternoon. She drank the broth, ate some of the bread, nursed her son with that deep tranquility he had noticed from the beginning. The room caught the afternoon sun through the window, and the golden light that fell on the two of them, mother and son, made Elias stop in the doorway for a second, his cup of coffee warming his hands, and feel that thing for... The following morning, well before the sun reached the middle of the sky, Elias prepared Chester for a longer journey. He left on the kitchen table, where the woman could reach without effort, water, bread, honey, fruit from the orchard, and the broth he had reheated on the stove. He called Rufus and Dama and left them outside the bedroom door as voluntary sentinels, a role they seemed to accept with professional seriousness. He tried to explain to the woman, still lying down but now with alert eyes and the baby in her arms, where he was going. He pointed north, made the gesture of riding, and said in Navajo the only phrase he had rehearsed mentally while awake the night before. Kinlani, Nanish. Something like, "I go to your people, I'll be back soon." She looked at him for a moment and then said something long and soft in Navajo. He did not understand every word, but in those syllables there was a kind of instruction or request, probably details about where to find the camp, who to look for, how to present himself. He nodded as if he had understood everything, and she seemed to accept that as sufficient. Chester set off at a steady trot heading north, and Elias carried with him only what was necessary: water, food for the journey, and a white handkerchief tied to his hat, a sign of peace that any traveler in those lands understood. The landscape to the north of the Callahan Ranch was different from the one Elias inhabited. The flat lands gave way to more rugged terrain, with red sandstone formations that rose from the ground like forgotten cathedrals, and the vegetation changed: less corn and more sagebrush, fewer willows and more twisted pines. It was a territory of rough beauty, the kind that is only appreciated when one learns to look without hurry. Elias had been to that region 3 or 4 times over the years, always at someone's invitation, to trade goods, to report cattle movements, for the small diplomacies of neighborliness that life in the West required. He knew that the Navajo of that part of the territory were a proud and hospitable people toward those who honored the unwritten agreements of the land, not crossing certain boundaries without warning, not entering camps without being seen arriving. So when the first signs of the camp began to appear, the marks of old campfires, the tracks of many horses, the wider trail worn by frequent feet, Elias slowed Chester's pace and began riding more openly, without concealing himself, so that anyone who saw him would know from a distance that he had no intention of surprising anyone. It was a young girl who spotted him first. She must have been about 12, emerging from behind a rock formation with a basket of roots in her hand. And she looked at him with that mixture of curiosity and caution Elias knew well. He lifted his hat very slowly and said, "Ya te," the basic greeting in Navajo, the first word any sensible man learned. The girl did not respond, but neither did she run. She turned and disappeared behind the rocks, and Elias knew he should simply wait. Minutes later, 2 men came to meet him, both middle-aged, with sun-weathered faces and serious but not hostile expressions. Elias dismounted from Chester. Being on the ground, at the same level as others, was a basic gesture he had learned early, and greeted them again. What followed was a conversation made more of gestures than words, with Elias's few Navajo terms supplemented by the considerable patience of the 2 men, one of whom spoke a few English words. Elias explained what had happened: the woman, the Ayasha, and pointed north, then to his heart. "Daughter, sister of my blood." Elias understood. The woman he had found was this man's family, and the expression that opened on the man's face in that moment, that mixture of relief, surprise, and contained emotion, was identical to what Elias had seen on the faces of white men, black men, and Mexican men in similar situations. The love of family had no accent. "The baby is well," said Elias. "She is too. At my ranch, resting. You can come whenever you like." The man translated for his companion, and then something unexpected happened. The companion, the more serious of the two, who had not smiled until then, extended his hand. A large, calloused hand, exactly like Elias's. Elias shook it. The group that returned with Elias to the ranch was 6 people. The 2 men, 2 older women who were clearly healers or experienced midwives, the girl with the basket who had been the first to spot him, and an older man with gray hair who walked with the quiet serenity of someone accustomed to being respected. Elias knew instinctively that this last person was someone of importance in the community, not through arrogance, but through that particular quality of presence that only a few human beings carry. The arrival at the ranch was silent and orderly. Chester was settled alongside the horses the group had brought, and the animals greeted one another by sniffing with the unpretentious democracy that horses have. Rufus and Dama kept their distance, respectful. When the 2 older women entered the room where Ayesha rested with her son, there was a moment of soft and rapid voices, of hands touching the baby and checking the mother, and Elias stayed outside, leaning on the porch, pretending to contemplate the apple orchard. In truth, he was simply giving space for that reunion to happen with dignity. The older man came to him after a few minutes. The 2 of them stood side by side on the porch for a moment without speaking. Then the man said, in surprisingly clear and calm English, "You helped a daughter of our people. That is not forgotten." "Anyone would have done the same," said Elias. The man looked at him with an expression that was not quite agreement. "No, not anyone, but you, yes." Elias did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing, which seemed to be the right answer. The older man looked at the orchard. "Good apples," he said. "The best in the territory, if you'll pardon the lack of modesty," said Elias. The man gave a short and genuine laugh, and somehow, in that simple laugh, something settled between the 2 of them, a silent understanding that they had been neighbors on this land for a long time, and that perhaps it was time to be real neighbors. Ayesha and her son stayed at the ranch for 2 more days, until the older women decided she was strong enough for the journey back. During that time, the camp and the Callahan ranch exchanged visits as if it had always been that way. The women taught Elias an herbal tea they prepared from plants they gathered along the river, which, they said, was good for sleeping soundly and waking without heaviness in the chest, something that, Elias admitted, he had been missing for some time. In return, Elias opened the barn and brought corn, squash, and a large pot of honey for them to take back. On the last day, when the horses were loaded and the group was preparing to leave, Ayesha came out of the room carrying her son and went to Elias. She said something long in Navajo that he did not understand, but the 2 older women who were beside her translated in parts and gestures enough for him to grasp the general meaning. She was saying that the boy had been given a name, and that one part of that name, the part that meant river, had been chosen because of the place where he had been born, and that the other part, which Elias could not quite pronounce correctly but sounded like wind passing through stones, meant, said the women, something close to open hand. Elias looked at the child for a moment. The boy slept in his leather wrapping with the absolute and irrational tranquility of newborns, completely unaware of the fact that he had come into the world in a particularly dramatic way. "That is a good name," said Elias. Ayesha smiled,
that same smile from the first day by the river, which had come after so much effort and pain and arrival into the world. The group departed, heading north, and Elias stood on the porch until the red dust kicked up by the horses' hooves dissolved into the still afternoon air. Rufus and Dama came to sit beside him. Chester, from the pasture, tossed his head as if in farewell. Elias stood a while longer looking at the horizon, then went inside, lit the stove, and made the herbal tea the women had taught him. He slept that night without any heaviness in his chest. In the weeks that followed, and in the years after them, that part of the territory became known among the Navajo and among the ranchers of the region for the particular silence between them. Not the silence of strangers, but the silence of people who had already said what mattered and had no need to repeat it. It was the kind of peace that does not appear in history books, but that existed, simple and stubborn, on the banks of rivers and on the porches of ranches where men and women learned that the land is large.